Welcome back to The Greats with Colton and Doc. Doc, why don't you kick us off? What are we talking about today?
So we have a pretty big mouthful to take in. Abrahamic religions, Judeo-Christian religion coming out of the Middle East. We have the Eastern religions coming out of the Indus River Valley and the Indian subcontinent. So Hinduism, Buddhism, and Ecclesiastes, the ancient sages, Solomon. So it's a big day.
Yeah, I'm super excited. This study so far has just been immensely helpful. You talked about earlier the pursuit of truth, which we share. It's kind of how we came together.
Yeah.
A desire to know what's true.
Right.
And one element of that is knowing what's true about other faiths and religions, like what you mentioned, because I had some background on Hinduism and Buddhism in particular, but I really had taken away Strawman. I had just enough knowledge to get it wrong.
Yes.
And so to really dive into the primary sources and now start getting it right and seeing where I had misunderstandings.
Yeah.
And now coming to a true knowledge of what they believe so that I can assess the big T truth has been just like tremendously helpful.
Absolutely. And I think when I was taught growing up, bless him, whoever it was that taught me, but I think the way it was presented made the other religions sound stupid. And I've learned as an adult, if a billion people follow it, it's not stupid. Like there's something to it. And that's been helpful for me to say, okay, let's get beyond the caricatures, like the straw men, and see what they really believe and hear it in their own terms. And one thing that's been helpful to me is two teachers, C.S. Lewis and then one living professor. Lewis helped me understand, if you think about mathematics, you can, once you get into complex mathematics, you can get a problem very wrong, you can get it sort of wrong, or you can get it nearly right, but it's still wrong. And I think religions oftentimes are in the same way. Truth is truth. And there's not that all religions are equally horrible and one is true. I think there is a true path. And as a Christian, I embrace that faith and I believe it's true. But I don't believe all other religions have completely missed every mark. And there are many ties. While there are fundamental differences that really matter, there are other things that we can discover about our own faith and bridges to build to other faiths by understanding them in their own words.
Yeah, exactly. Similar, had a big impact on me as well. And which maybe we won't get into today down this rabbit trail, but the way Lewis deals with myths and then Christianity as the true myth has been on my mind as I'm looking at these things that there's something true in them, and then, but then there's some other things which we'll probably get to. So let's talk about the Bhagavad Gita a little bit in terms of background. What were some of yours? You did sort of meta research on the actual work and where it comes from. What stood out to you?
Yeah. So when you think about Hinduism, they have, it is a huge topic, and it has been crazy. They even ask different questions, like, so for example, the question, who created the earth, is an illusion that exists in the illusion of the universe. So why even ask the question? I mean, it's like, so like the categories, the scriptures there are so many aspects to Hinduism. It's extremely complex, which is why it's helpful to have the Bhagavad Gita, which comes later in their scriptures. So it'd be almost like our New Testament after the Old Testament, right? So it's a later sacred writing, but it helps to summarize and clarify some of the things that came before. And it's also helpful that it's a story, and you can just get into the story. I don't know how you experience
the same. So it's helpful. I think one of the reasons that it's been so enduring and impactful is it does kind of consolidate. If you look at the Hindu scriptures compared to something like the Christian scriptures, it's immensely larger. So even
immensely complex.
The Mahabharata, which is this ancient epic that the Bhagavad Gita comes out of, that work is something like 7,000 pages. I actually downloaded the free PDF. Yeah. It's 7,000 pages. Compare that to the
and that's
like
just the Mahabharata.
That's just that, right?
Yeah,
just
that
one epic, and there are two of those, and then there's a bunch of other scriptures.
Many thousands.
You total them all up, it's something like 5 to 6 million words in the Hindu scriptures versus 750,000 in
the Christian Bible.
So much larger and less accessible. I mean, some of these are really difficult. And so something like the Bhagavad Gita takes it and makes it where anyone can read it and understand it. It's a story, and it really touches on the main paths.
That's right.
And really the core concepts.
And just to clarify what the work is, the Bhagavad Gita, it's this sort of story within the epic. And it was composed, give or take, 500 BC, and the Indian religions had been really starting about 1500 BC in the Indian subcontinent, Indus River Valley there. south of the Himalayas and going east. So there's this Vedic religions starting at 1500, and for 1,000 years they're adding scriptures and traditions, and then about 500 BC they begin to codify it into this epic, and then the Bhagavad Gita is a work that comes out of that, and so that's kind of the work for today, and which is interesting because at the same time you have, we'll get to it later, but Buddhism is emerging at the same time, 5th century BC. So is Taoism, 5th century BC. Lao Tzu, all of these, there's a lot of reformers within Eastern religion happening about the same time the Gita is being written. And so for them, for the many different areas of Hinduism to embrace the Gita as sort of, okay, this is one of our epics that we all point to, I think that's a great starting point. And if you talk to many Hindus, they would say the Gita would be a point of agreement or reference to which we would all look. And so I think it's a thankfully it's doable. It was something we could take in and analyze, and then take it in context with Buddhism and of course with the other sages of the ancient world, Buddha and Solomon. So I look forward to getting into it.
Yeah, and it's a fairly short work, so somebody listening wants to take it on. This isn't a big commitment. It's a small book. It's like 100, 150 pages, maybe, depending on the print and everything. So yeah, it's very, very accessible and doable. Maybe a little bit of context will help, because I think this will come out in our as we're talking about it. The larger epic that it comes from is really something of a battle stories.
Yes.
Two brothers and their families have an argument over the kingdom. I won't get into too much detail, but ultimately, this is when the two really different families, but they're all related, are coming together in a conflict over this kingdom, in a war over it. And it's on that sort of meeting at the battlefield that the Bhagavad Gita takes place.
Right.
And kind of having that bigger understanding of it helped me a good bit.
Yes, you're right. So the entry point is this battle is about to be enjoined. And this Prince Arjuna says literally in chapter 1, before we enjoin the battle, I want to ride through the middle of the lines and observe who it is we're about to annihilate. And as he's riding in his chariot through the battle lines, and he has his army to one side and the opposing army to the other side, he notices that really both sides are filled with family and friends. These are cousins, grandfathers, uncles, and these are people who are close to him, and he despairs to think, I can't do this. He throws down his weapons and he tells his charioteer, I can't do the battle. And the rest of it's 18 chapters, and the rest of the 17 chapters that follow are this dialogue between him and his charioteer to essentially get him to enjoin the battle. Mm-hmm. And that is the Bhagavad Gita. That is what's happening in this poem.
Yeah, exactly. And that charioteer is Krishna,
right,
who is the Vishnu sort of. Hinduism is very diverse, so it's hard to make any statement. Hinduism teaches or believes this,
right,
without being a little bit inaccurate. But Vishnu is incarnated as Krishna in this story. And so he's the charioteer who's then sort of counseling Arjuna on what course of action he should take and why. And that gets into ethics. That gets into sort of who we are, what our nature is.
That's right.
What is our ultimate end, or summum bonum, our greatest good.
That's right.
And so one of the reasons I think that this work is so attractive and has endured and become so beloved is because it does speak to those perennial questions that we keep coming back to. Why am I here? Who am I? What should I do? How should I live?
Yeah, and these 18 chapters are a great summary. There's 10 chapters of this dialogue, and then in the 11th chapter, I believe it is, Krishna reveals himself in all of his glory, and at the end of the chapter, Arjuna's like, okay, never mind. Please go back to humanity. And then at that point, it's kind of settled. And the rest of the 8 chapters or 7 chapters, he just sort of takes it in and downloads wisdom and figures out, how do I go forward with this? And then in the end, agrees to enjoin the battle. So the Gita is an incredible summary of wisdom that Krishna gives to Arjuna and really to the whole Hindu world.
Yeah, I think that in the context of it being a battle, which also, echoed like the Iliad for me, thinking about Homer and how at that time it's not an uncommon way to give teaching is in the context of battle and conflict. But the other, maybe more important takeaway for me was it's in a moment of moral crisis that all of this becomes relevant.
Yep.
And so it draws our attention to, I think, one of the essential questions, certainly for Hinduism and very much so for Buddhism, which is human suffering.
Yes.
And how do we make sense of a world in which A, there is suffering, and B, there appears to be indiscriminate suffering where the good people die and the bad people thrive. How do we make sense of that? And so let's talk a little bit about that. What was your sort of take on that as far as how Hinduism approaches and kind of solves that problem, the problem of evil, we could say?
So, good point that when you say Hinduism teaches, you have to be careful because there's so many different versions of Hinduism. In fact, even in our conversations with our Hindu friend Sam, we would be asking about things that he'd never heard of, but are clear Hindu doctrine in other traditions. And so, but how they approach suffering was essentially from the standpoint of Dharma, as I understood, which is duty. You have to do your duty to God, to community, to yourself, to society, and when duties come into conflict, you have to essentially choose, and it's not always clear which side you should choose. So in this moment, Arjuna is caught between his duty to honor his family and his duty to honor his role as a warrior prince to settle this conflict. And so he's not sure which duty or dharma he should go with. And Krishna helps him to understand that his role as the warrior prince is the primary duty, and actually solves the problem of human suffering, because essentially saying there is no suffering. You are not killing anyone. It is above your pay grade, my words, not his, but it's above your pay grade. If something is living, you can't kill it. But what you must do to continue the world, to continue order, to maintain the social order is more important than to preserve the lives of these people, because they'll be reincarnated as something else, and perhaps even better by doing their duty by coming to this battle. Mm-hmm. So you are simply moving them on to their next step. And basically, so the way they resolve suffering is to essentially say, it folds into a bigger picture. And if you just do your part in the bigger picture, then suffering is ultimately resolved. Mm-hmm. That's how I understood it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yep. And I think both Dharma, which is sort of concept of order and duty, and then karma, which is something like a natural reinforcement mechanism that brings that Dharma to bear and maintains order in the cosmos, made me think of the Greek view in which that the god's role is basically to maintain order in the cosmos, Zeus in particular. But when it comes to the problem of evil, I found the Hindu approach to have a really powerful explanatory scope and power, or a broad explanatory scope and power, meaning, so you look at suffering and the way that we see it, it's really hard. I mean, there's a reason that we've wrestled with it so much for so long. But on the Hindu view, all of it, no matter what kind of suffering you see, it can always be explained by bad deeds in a previous life.
Yes.
So you see this child who has this terrible disease, and this wouldn't necessarily be their only way of explaining it, but there's always explanation. Well, they did something wrong in the past life, and so it just makes sense, right?
And what's interesting is that if that child with the disease, let's say they're crippled in their feet, well, clearly they did something wrong. But if they were born into a higher caste family, they probably did something right at the end to give them a little positive momentum. And so they were reborn with crippled feet, but into a good family to give them an opportunity to continue on that line. And so there are, as you say, it's complex. It's not just simple. He did bad deeds, got born with sickness. There are layers to this. How sick, which family, which continent, which religion. And that will explain a very complex journey from the past.
Yes, yeah, exactly. But I think it eliminates, within the Christian framework, the problem of evil as it's typically conceived of is, how does this good, all-powerful, all-knowing God, how do you have that and also have this suffering that seems so unjust? For them, that's really not an issue. That's really taken away, and it's just the suffering that we see is karma trying to essentially restore, get order into the cosmos.
That's right.
And so, I found it to be really powerful in the way it explains that, but it also seems to come with a kind of high price tag to me.
Yes, it does.
That when you see that suffering, it's like a punishment almost, and they don't actually think of it as quite as punishment, but
they think of it more like as justice almost. Like I'm receiving. It's like an action reaction, every a cause and effect, and so I deserve this. I deserve this harm. I deserve this hurt because I did this to myself, and so it doesn't put it on God. It puts it on you, and everybody kind of gets to in some ways watch that. But what's interesting is human suffering is, don't forget, very important. many Hindus believe that by the time you're born as a human, you're already an elite creature because you've been through 8.4 million life cycles of animal creatures to get to humanity. So even the lowest, worst human is an elite being because you've been through 8.4 million life cycles of other things and not even living things entirely. You could be a rock, or you could be a mountain or a river or a tree or something else. And eventually, somehow, you did that well. And you got good karma, and then you became a caterpillar or whatever, and eventually you worked up. So the worst human is still very advanced in the world of karma.
Yeah. And maybe the best thing that could be said about being a human is that once you get to that level, you're just potentially one step away from the ultimate good of moksha.
And this is where Hinduism begins to diversify, to bifurcate, because there are Hindus who believe that you have to work your way up the caste system, and only certain humans can achieve moksha or liberation from the life cycles. And so the goal in Hinduism isn't to, quote, get to heaven. The goal is to be liberated from these life cycles, and the way you do that is that you achieve oneness, with the Brahman, with Brahma, the creator God, and then Brahman, the ultimate reality. But in other Hindu traditions, any human is able to achieve moksha if they follow the light they're given. And so there's some diversity and difference of opinion on this, which is interesting.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's a really important thing to bring in, that the greatest good, the ultimate goal, is that liberation. So in the West, typically, if I've talked to quite a few people who have said they believe in reincarnation, and usually it's sort of this like positive sentiment, like, like reincarnation, that's how it's gonna work. But that's the problem in Hinduism.
That is the problem.
Right?
No. A lot of Westerners think of reincarnation as, oh, sweet, we get more chances.
Right, and more time.
Whereas they think of this as, this is the problem. Like, to live is pain, and we want to be liberated, literally liberation from these cycles, what the Hindus will call samsara, the cycles of rebirth, and therefore the hope is to achieve oneness with God and stop all of this and get out of this place, essentially.
Yeah. And then in terms of the paths to that was another thing that I really appreciated, honestly, in the Gita. It covers the three which are traditionally conceived of this way in most Hindu schools of thought: the path of wisdom, the path of action, and the path of devotion.
Right.
And so I believe in the Gita, the path of wisdom may be described as the path of knowledge. But the way it elevates those three things, which I think we would agree, these
wisdom,
are supremely
action, and
right.
devotion.
These are like acting the right way, doing the right thing, seeking knowledge or understanding or wisdom, and then having devotion to that thing which is the greatest good.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good description of a good life.
Yeah, and even Solomon talks about these things, right? And we in our world, in the Christian orb, the idea to be wise, to be people of action, right, and to be people who are responsible to the things that we've given, to be devoted. This is important. It brings it, because so often the Judeo-Christian belief system is reduced to something you just believe. It's a set of tenets that you hold, and that did strike me about the Hindu religion, is that it's like kind of an all or nothing. Like, you're all in or you're not it. And you are devoted, you have knowledge and wisdom, and you have action, or you don't. You're not it. And it brings the whole person to their faith, and it brings the whole faith to their life. And that was really inspiring in a way, to see that they see this religion not as something that's sort of a part of their life.
Right.
It is their life.
Yes, yeah. And in that way, it's similar to true Christianity, which is this all things, view of life. And it's also, this is just human nature. But if you were to look at the 1.2 million, or 2 billion rather, roughly, Hindus, the majority of those are what we would think of as nominal Hindus. So they're Hindus, but they're not devoted. They're not doing all those things. So it's very similar, I think, to Christianity and probably any other religion in that way. But I do think that it definitely draws in the whole person and speaks to the whole person, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
In terms of the path of knowledge or wisdom and the elevation of truth and its importance, I also appreciated. There's a part in chapter 7, which I'll read this really quick, just a brief excerpt. Of many thousand mortals, one perchance striveth for truth. And of those few that strive, nay, and rise high. Only one here and there knoweth me, as I am the very truth. So there's a couple things that come in from this. One is that
what chapter is that?
Chapter 7. So page 818 for me.
Yeah.
So one idea is that most people aren't on a truth quest, which is definitely true.
Yeah.
There aren't many people who are striving for truth. That isn't the thing we're optimizing around. More often, it's something like what is easy or convenient, or makes me feel better, happiness quest sort of thing.
Right.
So most people aren't on a truth quest, which I think is accurate. But it also called to mind sort of Matthew chapter 7. This broad is the way that leads to destruction, and narrow few that find it.
Yeah.
Because he's saying, look, truth is not found by most people. Is the sort of teaching here. And then he also, this is Krishna speaking, I should say, presents himself as the very truth, which I thought was kind of interesting. Sort of echoes, right? I am the way, the truth, and the life.
And what's interesting is that, even in talking to our Hindu friend and being at the Hindu temple and observing all of that, and even the religious worship service, when you ask them about truth, they don't think of truth in terms that Christians would think of truth. Like, this is true, and that makes something else false.
Right. Yes.
Because what they conceive of truth as, there's a reality called Brahman, and it is not personal. It is like a force. And the main creator god, Brahma, or I guess Vishnu and Krishna, these three sort of gods, they create a world which is really an emanation of their divineness. And even talking to Sam, he was like, you are good Christians and you'll go to heaven, and the Muslims will go see Allah, and we'll all kind of like. And I was, and in my mind, I'm thinking, how can all these things be true? But he's thinking of every truth in this universe is a part of the same emanation of the same God, and while they may appear different on the surface, it's essentially, imagine a tree that could grow sort of like apples on one side and pears on the other side, but they're both sort of roundish fruits, right? And I think that's how they view religion, that it comes from a single source. It may look different on the surface. Maybe a better illustration is just the different shaped apples. That's how they think of the different religions, but they're really just all apples. And so I think they would say that what's true is simply corresponds to ultimate reality, but it doesn't matter what it looks like on the surface, because it's all an illusion out there anyway.
Yeah, that calls attention to something that you have to be attentive with when you're reading either about these, but especially going to the primary sources. Same terminology does not mean same meaning.
Yes.
We talked about it in the past a little bit. And so you see a phrase like, I am the very truth, means something actually quite different from what Jesus means when he says, I am the truth. But despite the sort of parallel there. Another thing that I thought of in the pursuit of truth, which I appreciated from it, is how it connects goodness and truth. Meaning that if you want to pursue truth and wisdom, there's a moral component to it.
Yes.
You cannot, which is something I think all of the ancients understood. All of the ancients understood that if you want to understand what is true, you have to be good.
Yes.
That these two things go hand in hand together, whereas I think in the modern, more secular world, we've separated those.
Yes.
So to think of somebody as being highly educated and informed and intelligent, that's how you get truth.
Right.
It really doesn't matter what they do in their private life. We completely separate those. Where I think the ancient world got it right, in that these are in fact connected. If you really want to understand the most important truths, there's a moral component that you have to.
And I think that's a strong connection to the Hebrew tradition. That that to know God isn't to have an intellectual understanding, or to even offer intellectual assent, but to know God is to experience a relationship with Him. Like even the in the King James, to Adam knew Eve was a sexual intimacy. Like, so to know someone was to be intimate with them. And so for the ancient Hebrews, to know God or even know His name was a very intimate and personal. I experience you. I've embraced you. It's not an awareness or an understanding or even an assent. It is a full embracing of a relationship. And I think that's where the Eastern traditions would agree that to be good or to understand truth is to also be the truth. It's to experience the truth. It's to live the truth. So if you truly know it and understand it, you'll live it, and it will make you good. It will, the Dharma, the duty will push you in a way that brings order to society and provide good karma to you and achieve moksha and liberation. It's kind of like all one thing. And so many parallels between the two, the Abrahamic religions and the Hindu family of religions, out of which came Buddhism, out of which came Jainism, out of which came Taoism. I mean, so many little, you know. When you take these two poles of Abrahamic and Eastern religions, so many parallels around truth being something that you know, not in your mind, but with your whole life. And if you know truth, you'll live it. And if you don't live it, you don't know it.
Yeah, that's really well put. Yeah, I sort of had that same impression or takeaway. And I think the part of what's undergirding or foundational to these similarities is that all of these traditions, except something like moral realism, to use a sort of technical philosophical term, that there are actual moral facts and we can know at least some of them. So opposed to a subjectivism or error theory or some other form of meta ethics where we don't envision a world in which some things are actually right and wrong, independent of what anyone thinks about them, and that we can attain or have some understanding of those. The fact that pretty much every religion, certainly all these the main ones that we're talking about, they all agree on that. And that creates a common
and I think that is a really good point, Colton, because one thing that stood out to me that was, we're saying that many of these core world religions share a lot of similarities, even while they have fundamental differences that matter. But one of the similarities that is striking is this sense that there is, like what Lewis would have called the Tao. There's this way of living that's good, that's righteous, that's even holy, that's sacred, that's beautiful. And if you live in a way that is in accord with that goes with that grain, then you do well. You achieve karma, you achieve moksha, liberation, you achieve whatever. But if you go against that, then you are harming yourself and others and even the universe. And one element that I thought that I learned was I thought was true is I thought that Hinduism was sort of a polytheistic, that whatever you think is fine, and sort of a universalism, all truths are true. But it's not that. They really do believe in an ultimate reality that's impersonal, and all truths are simply our illusions or versions of that go back to it. They're not all true in the same way, but they all go back to an ultimate truth, an ultimate form of life that is singular. And that resembles the Judeo-Christian concept of that there is a single creator God who has created a way the universe should be, and that when we live in accordance with that way, a pagan can read Proverbs, and if you live by Proverbs, you'll do well. You may not know God, but you will be on that path and living according to that goodness. And so that to me was a fascinating parallel to see how they would praise living a certain way. And not all religions are. If you have a religion over here that's saying you should be unkind to people, or like a cannibalism, right? That would be considered horrific to the Hindu world because it's departing from the nature of reality. But I found that really fascinating parallel.
I have somewhere in the beginning of one of the chapters, I wrote the Tao because it starts out with this essentially like this is what it means to be moral. And as I'm reading through that list, I'm like, yep. This is all very familiar. It's sort of universal. And Lewis, talks about that, uses that term, the Tao, to explain this sort of universal morality that humans share, even as we get some other things different or have some differences. So that's a lot of the things that I appreciated in it. But there are also some things that definitely left me wanting more, or some potential issues. I think one of the big things that seems to be missing for me is forgiveness. There's just really no concept of forgiveness.
We were asking our Hindu friend about that, and he said that, like, forgiveness is not a thing. Like, the way you get forgiven is essentially you just change your behavior and try to erase the negative karma. So if I steal something from you and I'm caught, I can say I'm sorry, but he's like, you can apologize, and your friend might say he forgives you, but you're not forgiven. The universe holds you accountable. And you're still on the hook for whatever that was, because the justice of the universe will not be satisfied except for your death, little d, except for your atoning for yourself. And that's why if you do well, you could be either liberated through moksha or reincarnated at a higher level. But if you do poorly and if you personally don't get rid of all your bad karma, you will degenerate. You will be demoted, and forced essentially to fight your way back up, because the universe will take out your sins on you regardless, which was really, it may feel superficially liberating, like I'm the master of my own fate, but I feel like that would be terrifying.
Yeah. 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 Exactly.
How do you
here,
know?
right? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think just this idea that you essentially just have to pay for your own sins.
Yeah.
You have to pay for them one of two ways, either by suffering the like negative consequences through karma, or by doing enough good things to sort of reverse or make up for, accommodate, atone for, in a sense.
And I think one of the things that I found that I really appreciated about Hinduism, and again, I found helpful to me, was the very high view of God, very high view of God. The problem is that it was so high and so far that you begin to just kind of like, and all of a sudden, we talked about before the episode that they believe that essentially the universe is in a 311 trillion year life cycle, and that by the time you become a human, you've gone through 8.4 million life cycles of other beings and things, and then you could have nearly infinite millions of life cycles. And I'm just thinking, I first of all do not want to do that. I do not want to do that. But the one way that this idea of detachment, kind of becoming like I sort of neutralize myself to the world, and that's how I deal with either suffering and I neutralize my karma by doing good things to offset the bad things, and then I kind of come out clean, if you will. I felt like it really moved me away from appreciating and engaging the life that we're given. Whereas I feel like as a human, even beyond a Christian, as a human, I just feel in my gut, I should enjoy the wind in my face, that it's real. I'm not living in the Matrix, but it felt like a little bit in Hinduism, like you're living in the Matrix, like none of this is real. The truth about the spoon is it's not the spoon, right? It's not there, right? And so it's like, I wanted to say, I had this hunger to say, but there's got to be something that matters about this life. And I had a hunger in my gut to say, this has to matter. My wife and kids have to matter. When I bring myself to God, that has to matter. And I felt like that to the Hindus, it didn't matter that it doesn't matter. Like, because I've got 1,000 more lives to deal with. And maybe that's satisfying in a way, but for me, it left me a little empty.
Yeah. Yeah. I think especially as you're saying that, it makes me think of the view is essentially that our existence as human beings, our humanity in this world is disposable. And so it has a purpose, which is to get us to something that's completely different, this liberation or moksha. And I think where that similar to you, where that leaves me unsatisfied is I feel like the beauty in this life is really truly beautiful, and it matters, and it's something actually permanent. Like we're actually touching something that is part of reality that doesn't change.
Yes.
And I want to keep being me, keep being a human, and I think that is not at all both in the sense of reincarnated lives, as you go through the cycle of birth and rebirth, you really aren't Colton isn't going to be in the next life. My Atman, my fundamental soul, yes, but I don't have any memories of me. There's no true identity that carries over in this the transmigration of the soul. And so that was a little bit underwhelming. And then the fact that the ultimate state is to not be human.
Yeah. Is to merge with the Brahman and your consciousness is now absorbed by the Brahman. And like you say, you have no memories of who you were or whatever, and your life, if you will, is reabsorbed by ultimate reality, and there's no real understanding of how that existence works, and it's completely separate and other than this existence. And there is a bridge essentially to our, as a Christian, you may think, well, this is ridiculous. Well, we all do believe that, let's just say the saints that went before us, that they're in a greater reality than this one, that they're in a more permanent reality, that they see God face to face and they see things we don't see, and that this world is passing away. So there's a similar concept in the Judeo-Christian world, but the difference is that this world matters. And the reason it matters is that God made it. Like he spoke it into being, and he gave it its dignity and made man in his image to rule in his name. And so there's a sense in which we're not seizing dignity for ourselves. We were given dignity by God and made in his image to reflect that image, to lead creation in a way that would reflect his holiness, beauty, and power, his truth, goodness, and beauty. And to each other, to reflect that to each other, and that matters. And so when I wake up, I think these things matter. These days matter. My words matter. And it's not just, oh, okay, well, if I screwed up, I've got another million lives to fix it. Like these days matter. And in fact, they're the ones we're given, and the only ones we're given. And so that, to me, was an important difference, which is a significant difference in the way that you would approach life.
Yeah. Yep. Same. Yeah. I think back to one more comment on the detachment, which is essentially my understanding at least is that for Hinduism, the real problem, if you kind of assessing, the way that religion conceives of the world, our big problem is ignorance and attachment.
Yeah.
It's what we don't know and understand. So sort of ignorance, and then the way in which we become attached to this world, which is ultimately the sort of illusion or not something that is good or permanent that we should be attached to.
Right.
This just seems to devalue too much that is good in the world. The idea that you should receive joy and sorrow with perfect equanimity. Right. Like the illustration that's given is you're like an ocean and you have these streams flowing into you, but those streams just have no impact on you whatsoever.
That's right.
Whereas I think, and this makes me think of, it's adjacent to, it's similar to the concept of Christian contentment. But what seems to be different, if I'm understanding it right, is that with Christian contentment, we receive the sorrows as sorrowful. Like pain actually really does hurt, and we can sit and there's a season for that, Ecclesiastes.
That's right.
But there's also seasons of joy, and we can experience that joy in its fullness, and not have to try to maintain a sort of almost, stoic. Stoics wouldn't like that I'm saying this, but a sort of stoic. Just it doesn't affect us at all. Just passes, whether something awesome happens or something terrible. Just no effect. That seems to just weaken the goodness and the badness in this life.
And I think that one key to understanding that why we're feeling that is to point out that in Christianity, we have what we call a dualistic worldview, that we believe there's a God and there's a creation and they're separate, they're dual. There is a non-dualistic, so Hinduism is it is a monistic thing. And in the sense that what we see in the created universe is really just an emanation of the divine. And there's not two things, there's just one thing. And what we experience, we think we're experiencing, right? And there is a sense in which it's real, but there's also a sense in which it's an illusion. It's just an emanation of the divine, and there's not a separation between creation. That they're all creator, right? They're all one thing, and that liberation literally means to be enlightened to the fact that we are one with the Brahma, the Brahman, and therefore we don't really exist separately from him. And I think Christians would say even like all truth is God's truth, all beauty is God's beauty, all power ultimately is God's power, and maybe even all life is God's life. And that's, if the Hindus, like you said, saying the same thing a little differently, all life is God's life means literally we're all just an emanation of God. The reason that, like you say, I think that's important to point out this non-dualistic view is that everything that happens within the context of the Brahman's emanation. Like it all just kind of happens within this orb, and it's above my pay grade really to judge whether it's good or bad. It happened. God's let it happen. And so like you say, it should impact me no more than the ocean is impacted by one wave over another. And what appears to us good and bad are really just ripples on essentially the sea of this one thing. And it's neither good nor bad. It's just the thing. And so, but I think that's where, as coming from a Judeo-Christian worldview, I would disagree with that and say that there is real good and there is real bad and things do matter, but there's an ultimate redemption that happens that's beyond us, that's behind a veil, and that God's providence does redeem all things in the end. And in the meantime, our job is not to figure it out, but to be patient and to walk the path he's given us.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, excellent. So that's right. I mean, I feel like I could talk about this for a few hours.
Oh, yeah.
But those are sort of my main thoughts on the Bhagavad Gita. Did you have anything else before we hop into Buddhist scriptures?
Good question. I don't think so. I think probably I would just say what makes the Gita great? You know, why is it in this series? What would be your takeaway on that?
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to be repetitive in this, but it speaks to our fundamental questions. It's speaking to how should I live? What is a good life? What's the ultimate purpose in it? How do I handle moral crises that come up when I'm faced with difficult decisions that sort of pull me in different directions? And so the way it speaks to our human problems, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, I think you're right. You know, the fact that the Gita summarizes well the way of wisdom, the way of action, the way of devotion, you know, jnana, karma, and bhakti. It summarizes this relation, this non-dual but perceived dual relationship between Arjuna and Krishna. And then the idea of what do you do when your Dharma is conflicting between family and my role as a warrior prince or whatever caste I'm in. And then how do I handle suffering? How do I handle honor? And what is the ultimate goal of life? Which, you know, for a Hindu is the ultimate goal is liberation from life. And I do find that as kind of in closing on the Gita, I think for Christians, you know, we would say our ultimate goal is to be with God in heaven. But even bigger than that, I think our goal is to know God. You know, is to know God now. Like, you know, when Jesus said, "For God so loved the world that He gave His only Son," whether it was Jesus or John, you know, whosoever believes in Him will not perish but have eternal life. That eternal life starts now. It's not like when you die you'll have eternal life.
Right.
But when you are born again into the family of God, then you experience a new life that really matters. And it's interesting, in the Hindu tradition, they have a born again concept. They even say that males are twice born, that they are twice born, once into the world and then again into. So they have this concept as well. Yeah. But it really is not. We think of it as a real birth, like a real spiritual awakening to God that we didn't have. We were spiritually dead, and now we're alive when we believe in Christ. Whereas for them, it's more symbolic. It's like, okay, twice born. It's really a tradition I go through. It's a ceremony. It's a ritual I perform to put myself just one notch further on the path towards an enlightenment, towards a moksha. It doesn't really mean I know God. It's just a signpost that I must pass that I hope that will move me more towards liberation. But we would consider being born again, really, that is the moment of liberation. That is because you're being liberated not from your from ignorance, but from death itself. And that's when eternal life begins. And that's what I find so compelling and inspiring about the Christian faith, is that our eternal life begins here and now. And that is the design that God gave us in the world.
Yeah. It was interesting talking to Sam because there's just, I would say that despite the similarity in the language between their twice born and our born again, really the closer parallel would be moksha. So like, you know, I asked him, or I think you did, you asked him, is that something you hope to obtain? He's like, oh, I've already got it.
Yeah.
And I was really shocked by that. But I think that would be something like if somebody asked me, well, do you have eternal life, or do you expect to get eternal life? And I would say, well, I already have it.
Yeah.
You know, I have eternal life now. So he would say he already has moksha now, not in its fullness. You know, after this life, he expects to have that more pure connection directly with his God. Yeah. But I do think that would be sort of the parallel.
But interestingly, he thought he could lose his moksha. You know, if he did enough bad things, he would lose his moksha and be kind of demoted. And so he said, as long as I stay on the path, I have my moksha. Yeah. So it's almost like an Armenian worldview there. But just very interesting. So in sum, I think I really appreciated the very high view of God, which was, again, very, very high. I appreciated their view of righteousness, that there's a way to live and a way not to live. And the fact that our actions matter to impact the world. But I think at the end of the day, I felt like that the idea of just endless cycles of options and chances really, to me, would have felt like a devaluing of this life, actually. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it's not dualistic, it's all monistic, this is all just one thing. So we're really just kind of in the mind, essentially, of Brahma. I thought, well, I guess it feels like a little bit of a que sera, sera. What will be will be. So let's, you could almost go like with eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we get another chance.
Yeah. We die and get reborn.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's actually a good segue into Buddhism, because we look at it. These are some of the things we're unsatisfied with.
Yes.
This is how Buddhism gets its start, essentially with the Buddha, who is a Hindu, but is dissatisfied with it and ultimately finds it to not quite go fulfill everything.
Yes.
Now, what's interesting, though, is what left us unsatisfied is very different from what leaves the Buddha unsatisfied.
Yes.
From Hinduism. So we'll kind of get into that. But maybe let's kick off with a little bit of what were our primary sources. It's a little bit harder, at least in my mind, to describe this, because it's not just one work. But let's talk about the Buddhist scriptures a little bit. What did you think about that?
Yeah, so the Buddhist scriptures are, again, these canons in the East are different from the canon in the West. Like, we think, okay, Old Testament, New Testament, maybe Apocrypha, but that's it. Everything else is way down on the list. For them, it's less of a canon and more of a body of sacred writings, right? So for the Buddha, we were looking at specifically his autobiography, his account of his kind of pre-incarnation, his incarnation, and his death, and how that looked, and then some of the key Buddhist teachings, and then some of the later takeaways of Buddhist key thinkers. So these were the Buddhist writings we looked at. The Buddha lived in the 400s BC, right, and was born as in a Hindu context, and was really a secular person, a prince, and then when he observed the suffering of his people, he really decided, I'm going to devote my life to alleviating suffering. And so that was kind of what was in the Buddha's mind. And then he began to notice that a lot of the suffering was not just human suffering, it was Hindu suffering. It was suffering under this yoke of Hinduism. And so he was coming at it from both angles, suffering as a human and suffering as a Hindu. How can I alleviate these things? And to be clear, Buddhism is a form, it's like an atheistic religion. Did you take that away?
Yeah, so that was actually, so it's interesting, because that was what I brought to it, was an understanding Buddhism is roughly atheistic. There's certainly no concept of like a creator God. And so, I would say that persisted throughout reading this. But what did surprise me, what I had brought to that was something like, well, Buddhism is fairly a naturalistic worldview as well, which is definitely not the case. There are all kinds of spiritual beings and realms, and even hell, which we'll get to, I think, at some point in the conversation. And so I was surprised by how, for lack of a better way to put it, how spiritual it was, how there was a lot of components outside of sort of the natural world and outside of one's own inner, life.
So are there any precursors to Buddhism you'd want to cover before we just get right into Buddhism? Any context outside of Hinduism? Like either the role of other religions, or different schools of Buddhism, or anything kind of about Buddhism?
Maybe it would be helpful to say there are roughly two main branches of Buddhism today, the Mahayana and the Theravada, which are, this is really not a great analogy, but something you could think of it roughly like Catholicism and Protestantism in terms of two major branches that share a core, but there was roughly a sort of split. The way in which they think differently is different from within Christianity, obviously, but just recognizing that. And I guess we could say that for one of the big differences, one of the things that differentiates the Mahayana, which is a little bit later development, I guess you could say that Theravada is more of a conservative Buddhism that tries to stick to the more ancient Pali texts, which is largely what we read from. So they are a little bit more conservative in a sense, trying to stick to those, whereas Mahayana is a little bit more innovative, or might say progressive in the way that it's developed. One of the big changes there is the way that they think of the bodhisattva, which is the idea that as you get close to nirvana, which is the greatest good, as we'll talk about, as you get close to that, actually you shouldn't just go into it. You should pause there and help as many other people as possible get into it. Yeah. And so it becomes much more, we might say, to use a Christian or Western term, evangelistic. Yeah. That, hey, it's not just about me pursuing it for myself while being compassionate to other people. That compassion needs to drive me to help as many other people as possible to sort of join in.
And what's interesting is that that's a later development. It's like Buddhism was a reform movement within Hinduism, and then this branch is a reform movement within Buddhism, which, by the way, takes it closer in some ways to a Christian model of it's not just about you, because early Buddhism was really, you progressed from student to householder to rural to literally to sort of a forest dweller. Like you were moving towards this isolation, and this was considered a move towards holiness, whereas this is the opposite. Now it's a move towards community and passing on. It's almost like you could say, one generation shall praise your works to another. It's like it becomes a community experience.
Yeah. I think the Mahayana version, let's say, is a lot more Western friendly, just because it is a little bit more compatible with sort of the Christian values that we tend to have in the West.
Yeah.
And so, I would.
Probably a good development for them. Yep. And tell me about Zen. Where does Zen fit in this? Because Zen is going to be probably the best known, Nirvana, obviously with the band or whatever,
Right.
We all know about Nirvana, but what about Zen? What is that?
Yeah. So as part of this, I spent almost no time on Zen. And so you may have more on that, but I do have a friend that I talked to that is what they are sort of going through. And so they go to these Zen retreats and so on. And so we've gotten into discussions on that. My understanding with Zen Buddhism is it kind of extracts itself from the doctrines or the sort of the Dharma. So like to my friend, it does not matter at all whether the Buddha actually existed. Like none of the historical stuff matters at all.
Right.
It's me and my experience now, and how can I, through these meditative practices, achieve this enlightenment.
Right.
But it's very sort of individualistic in that way. Now, what comes out of that, it's not like I don't want people to confuse that with selfishness.
Right.
The goal is through that individualistic sort of turning inside, meditative, I then become a better person and more compassionate to all, forms of life around me. That's roughly mine. And so one more thing I'll say on that is that it will be presented as essentially compatible with anything. So, hey, if you're a Christian, you can come do Zen Buddhism. If you're, whatever doctrines you bring to it, it's loosely compatible, can kind of work with those.
Yeah.
Is that roughly?
Yes, absolutely. And this really speaks to the core Buddhism, which had one goal, and that is to alleviate human suffering. In fact, he put all the metaphysical questions of like, who is God? Who created the world? Where do we go when we die? All these kind of questions. He called them questions not leading to edification.
Yes, right. Which is very
that was the
like
category. Not leading to edification. Like basically, and in fact, there was this famous arrow analogy he would use, and I'm actually going to flip to it here because I don't want to get it wrong. But the arrow analogy was a famous thing that the Buddha gave us, which said that if a man had been wounded by a poison arrow and you're ready to pull the arrow out, his friends and his companions, his relatives, are trying to pull the arrow out. And he says, but wait, before you pull out the arrow, who shot the arrow? Was it a man or a woman? And how old was the person? And I want to know, was he tall or was he short? And you're asking all these questions about the shooter of the arrow, or what kind of wood is the arrow? And what bird are the feathers of the back? And he's like, these don't matter at all. Just get the arrow out, right? And so he's like, none of those metaphysical questions matter. Just deal with human suffering. That was kind of his approach. And this illustration of the arrow, I think, summarizes really the core of the focus of Buddhism.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's a great illustration, and it does get to the heart of it, which is, even though there does come to be a pretty complex Buddhist cosmology, and there's a lot of sort of philosophy in it, the heart of it, the most important questions, the primary questions are, how do we solve suffering?
Yeah. And their answer to that essentially is a version of detachment, a neutralization, like, again, kind of the ocean. The good streams run in, the bad streams run in, but we just take it all in stride. And there's a way that I essentially neutralize the human suffering is created by my response to things that happen. So, in Buddha, you have the, I guess,
dependent origination.
Yeah. Well, I was the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Yeah. And I'm trying to remember, I need to get to my notes about the Four Noble Truths. Suffering exists. Yep. It's caused by craving or ignorance. It can be solved by reducing craving and ignorance. And the way you do that is that the fourth noble truth is you're on this eightfold path. And these things will help alleviate so that you have to neutralize your craving and neutralize your ignorance in order to not suffer, because suffering is created when you want something you can't have, or you want it wrongly, or it's wrong desires. So you neutralize that. And you do it by this eightfold path, right thoughts, right actions, right knowledge, right wisdom, right conscience, right whatever, and all these eightfold path will help you to alleviate suffering. And so that is kind of the heart Buddhism as I took away.
Yeah. Yep. I had the same sort of takeaway, and that was something that initially, before I got into this study, that left me sort of underwhelmed. And while I got additional nuance and a little bit more appreciation, that did kind of persist through it. It's just this idea that the core problem is just that you love things too much, that you're too attached to things.
Yep.
That is the problem, and so the solution is detachment from it.
Yep.
It seems like, and this is a little bit of a strawman characterization, but this is what I came into it with. Let's say I can at least say that the way to solve suffering is by killing the person.
Yeah, well, I found that as an interesting contrast to Hinduism, right? So Hinduism says, okay, we're not dualistic, we're all one thing, but I do have an Atman, right? I have a soul, and there is a Brahman, and somehow those things are there's an unclear relationship. Yes. Are they different? Are they the same? Yeah. Whatever. But there is this concept of I have an Atman, and that Atman transmigrates. It continues through cycles of life. Whereas in Buddhism, it's the opposite. I'm a non-being. I have an anatta, right? It's like I have a non-being, and I do have multiple cycles of life, but they're not transmigration or reincarnation as the same person into a new life cycle. It's a passing of the life, but not a continuation of the life. So think about it this way: if you plant a seed and you raise a corn, like that corn came from the seed, but it's a different thing.
Yes.
Or if you take a candle, they use this, and you light one candle from another candle, it's a new flame. It's not the old, it didn't take the old flame, but it's related to the old flame. So there's this non-beingness about Buddhism that was really fascinating. That's how they resolve this idea of suffering, is essentially, for lack of better words, like I don't exist ultimately.
Yeah.
I'm a non-being.
Yep. Yeah. One of the things that was helpful, that was corrective as I was studying this, to adjust the view that I had before, which was essentially that the Buddhist thinks that all desire is wrong, that you shouldn't desire things.
Right.
Whereas they have two different words for desire roughly, and one corresponds to good desires. There are some things that are good to desire, namely nirvana, to achieve enlightenment. But there are other things as well that are appropriate to desire. But then there are other desires that have these three roots, these three bad roots, which is something like greed.
Is it passion?
Passion, ignorance.
Yeah,
close,
yeah,
at least. Yeah, definitely
yeah.
greed and ignorance.
Yeah, because I think ignorance, darkness, and then sort of a passion, sort of like a fire, and then greed, or like
we say lust.
Yeah,
lust for things, which is made me think of, even though they do end up being different, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life.
Yeah, very similar.
It's kind of like the threes. One thing that struck me, this is kind of a tangent, but on Buddhism, is just the sheer number of numerical things, right? The 12 this, the 10 this, the 17 this, the 16 of these, the 20 of these. There's which I think probably partly what's going on there is, in an oral tradition, that is the way that's easy to memorize things, and it's also catchy. The three,
Yeah. So I mean, for an example, let me just again with in their own words. So he says here, he made a hut out of leaves, exempted from the 5 defects. And having all the virtues 8, there I gained the 6 higher powers. Okay, so and you're like, well, what are the the 5 defects of a hut of leaves? Well, here they are. The 5 defects are that they are in a walking place. There are hardness and unevenness. There are trees in the midst of it. There's dense underbrush and excessive narrowness. Oops, I must have missed one. I've gotten somehow, and then there's excessive width. Okay, that's the 6 or the 5 defects. What about the virtues 8 of a hut of leaves? Well. There is no annoyance experienced from others because they don't come around. They won't want, I guess, to be in your dwelling. Yeah. You have no passionate desire for furniture and other implements. There is no fear of being plundered by robbers. You have no intimacies formed with kings and courtiers. No one can be shut in any of the 4 directions. And it has you can eat in peace and quiet. And then it goes on. And then I ceased cloaks to wear. I stopped wearing a cloth, and then I started, because cloth has the 9 defects, and I girded bark trees, which has the virtues 12. So bark clothes have 12 virtues. Like, wow. And so, So it's like you say, it's very developed in certain ways. And I wasn't sure I really agreed with the Virtues 12 on the bark clothing.
On the bark,
I'm
there were a couple
say.
that I parted ways
I kind of
on.
went with the 9 defects of the cloth clothes.
Yeah, as you can see.
Yeah.
Yeah, same. Yeah, so I think one of the things that, as I'm approaching both of these and really our bigger project, is what is the greatest good and what is the good life?
Yes.
And so
yes,
I'm curious to get what's your impression on that, from the Buddhist text. What do we get as the picture of our greatest good that can be achieved?
Yeah, so our greatest good, enlightenment, again, it's a type of release, right? The same thing as in Hinduism, the moksha, the release from the cycles of samsara or reincarnation. For the Buddhist, it's really enlightenment that what? That suffering is my own problem. I cause it by craving or ignorance, and I can be released from it. And really, it doesn't speak. I mean, it believes in these continuations of life, but only vaguely, again, because it's like these are questions that tend not to edification, right? So the main summum bonum, the highest good, as I understood it, was enlightenment, that we are one with the universe in some way, and that frees us from craving things on earth in ways that are unhelpful, unholy, unrighteous, and being kind of like overly embodied and caught up in the hungers, lusts, desires of the flesh, and freed from that to focus on the spiritual realm. That's kind of what I took from it. How about you?
Yeah, right on. Very similar. One of the things that was interesting is at least from the text that I read, a sort of refusal to answer the question whether or not you're even in any sense alive or existing.
Okay, well, I actually have a quote on that. And so I'm reading here, in at the end of the events of his own attaining to Buddhaship, I'm on 628. There's this kind of there's this closing lines where where he speaks, the Blessed One speaks. How blessed the happy solitude of him who hears and knows the truth. Well, good. Okay, kind of on track. How blessed is harmlessness towards all. So like, you're in harmony with all beings. Yes. And self-restraint towards all living things. And so you discipline yourself not to harm or, great. Okay. All on track. How blessed from passion to be free. Okay. Maybe. All sensuous joys to leave behind. Well, again, maybe. Yet far the highest bliss of all. So like the lowest bliss is harmony with all living things. The next highest bliss is that you have left behind all passions. But the highest bliss of all is to quit the illusion false I am. That's the highest, is to quit the illusion false that I am. And I was like, wow. So the main liberation, the main salvation is to realize I am not. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, I guess maybe, but no.
Right. Yes, it's a very high price tag to solve. It solves the problem of suffering.
Yeah.
But at such a great cost, it seems like. I do think it's probably something we have to address is that, and this is where things get fairly complicated, but in the Middle Doctrine, there's a work, sort of a chapter on that. Mm-hmm. When you hear that, well, the greatest bliss is to realize that I am not. Right. We might think, okay, so that I just don't exist at all.
Right.
But the Buddha would say, well, no, it's not that you don't exist. It's just that you don't exist.
Right. And so I think this is where the passion, the person, the 5 aggregates comes into play. And so what they mean you don't exist is like, okay, let's say, like Colton, you're Colton, you're a person, right? Except you're not. You're an arm, you're an eye, you're some hair. And so he says, actually, the person is the 5 aggregates are form or body, feeling or senses, perception, mind, and consciousness. So you're these 5 things. And so they would use the analogy of a chariot, right? They say a chariot is really a word you use to describe this collection of an axle, a wheel, a hull, a harness, and all these things. There's no chariot. It's just a harness and some wheels and this, that, and the other. And you call this thing a chariot, but the chariot doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. It's just all these pieces. And in the same way, you're just all these bits of essentially the universe put together in a way that look like a human walking around, but you don't really exist. You're just all these bits. And the point is, if you can just get back to neutral, if you can kind of back out of thinking you're something when you're not, if you just would kind of, quit being too big for your britches and think that because the bits came together in a way that feels like you're godlike, if you would just back out of that and realize you're just bits, then you will be enlightened enough to sort of be beyond the what's the word? Like if the condescension of being human, you kind of move beyond it. That's kind of how I took it.
Yeah. Yeah. And in that way, it seems like a very fragmented view of reality and definitely the human person.
Yes.
It's, and some people have pointed this out. It really is, there's a philosophical view or term, mereological nihilism, which is basically the view that nothing actually exists.
Yeah.
Like chairs don't exist.
Yeah.
A chair is just
bits.
particles arranged
Yes.
chair-wise.
Yes.
And so it's really that, but a very ancient, sort of form of it, and applied to the human person, which is a really interesting place to target that laser. So that was tough. Like this would be a major stumbling block for me if I were trying to approach it.
Yeah. I think one thing, to speaking positively, one thing I think Buddhism got right was I think it emerged not just because of human suffering. Again, it was in a Hindu context. We're 1,000 years into Hinduism, right? So about 500 BC, 1500 it kind of started, and we're 1,000 years into it. And taking a flat view that if a person is born into a lower caste, they were evil in a previous life, and essentially they deserved it. So to treat them differently, to treat them with dignity, is actually to break the universal order, and so you must treat them lower because that's how the gods have treated them, if you will. And so I think the Buddha was trying to say this caste system has locked people into suffering, and I'm trying to help them alleviate it. And so he was trying to find a way forward for humans to have an experience that was non-suffering, no matter where you were born or how you were born. And so I do appreciate that about it. His answer to human suffering was, well, maybe karma is real, and we did have a role in this, but this human doesn't exist in a way that you think he does. And in fact, you don't exist in a way you think you do. And so even though you may be born into different castes, you have the same goal, and that is to achieve enlightenment through backing out of thinking you're actually a thing and reuniting yourself with the greater reality, whatever that is. And so as long as I can achieve an enlightenment, a neutralized enlightenment in this life here, then we'll leave the rest of whatever happens to the soul, whatever is out there, to that, and come what may.
Yeah, I think something that almost surprises me, given everything we just described and talked about, is how good the ethics is that emerges. I mean, the Buddhist ethic is pretty admirable and commendable and certainly familiar. And so that was something that I appreciated it with it. If you look at what the Eightfold Path is, it pretty much makes sense. Wisdom, virtue, or doing good things, thinking good things, saying good things. Yep. And then it has the sort of meditative aspect of it.
Yeah, and I mean, just for the record, I guess we'll go. The Four Noble Truths being the truth of suffering, the cause of suffering is passion and ignorance. Then you can cease to suffer by removing those things. And then the fourth noble truth is the Eightfold Path: right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So, these practices, what we would call spiritual disciplines that bring you into alignment with the noble truths, are the path towards enlightenment and freedom. So, not a bad way to live.
Yeah. Back to what you mentioned about the caste system, which I think is we could say an improvement from classical Hinduism to Buddhism, is breaking away from that. But interestingly, a different sort of class system emerges between at least from my understanding, between what we could say like monks and lay people. And so the impression I get is that a lot of Buddhism, and classical Buddhism at least, is almost off limits to the lay people. Their participation is mostly in giving alms to support the monastery, to support those monks or priests, we might call them. Yeah. And so as the lay person, you're not really participating in the greatest parts of the religion. You're just giving the alms, and then that's getting you meritorious karma, which is similar to the Hindu version, of course, so that in the next life you get closer and closer, and over time you may be born into a life in which you can become a monk and get liberation out of that. Yeah. It wasn't clear to me, and my suspicion is that within different schools and eras of Buddhism, you would get different answers to this question, whether or not you can achieve nirvana direct, like from anywhere, or if you have to reach some sort of level in terms of being a monk or something.
Yeah, I think in my understanding, and I agree, that was unclear, and I think it probably has evolved over time in different schools of Buddhist thought. But from what I read in these Buddhist writings, and the Buddha would have thought you could only achieve nirvana as a monk. Mm-hmm. And so as a layperson, you're moving towards being in a monastery and then eventually achieving enlightenment, because it's just too big a gap from if you will, from laity to enlightenment. It's just too big a gap, and so you have to do that over time as a monk. And so that you're right, there is this sense of, and I think that's one reason why classical Buddhism is declining. I mean, it's one of the great world religions that's actually decreasing. You know, I think it used to be 500 million. It's probably 400 now, maybe just under. And one of the reasons is that it's so monastery focused. That this idea of isolation from society and moving towards enlightenment isolates you from everyone is, again, not just as a Christian, but as a human. It just runs counter, because as I get older, I want more connection with my family, not less. Yeah. And I think it just runs counter to, and what they would explain that by saying, well, I have the wrong passions. And I'm like saying, no, I don't.
Yeah.
Those are God-given. Right. And the idea that I would love and bless not only my children, but my grandchildren is a God-given good passion. And the idea, it's noble to want to say you should detach from the world and in order to attach to God. But God put us in this world, and those two, what's good for me and my family should not be in conflict, what's good for me and God. Mm-hmm. And so he has given us a way to do both, to love our neighbor, which is the second commandment right after, love the Lord your God. And so Jesus brings those two things together and bases them, by the way, on the law of Moses. And so ever since 1500 BC, 1450, Moses writing the law, you've got these laws of love the Lord your God, love your neighbors yourself together, and they are not in conflict, whereas in Buddhism, they very much are.
Yeah. One thing that made me think of as you're talking is there's a part in the scriptures reread where the Buddha addresses why some fall short of the truth. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yes, this is a description of me. This is why I fall short of the Buddhist truth. I'll read it because it's brief.
Yeah. Yes.
And how, O priest, do some fall short of the truth? O priests, gods and men delight in existence and take pleasure in existence, rejoice in existence, so that when the doctrine for cessation of existence is preached to them, their minds do not leap towards it, are not favorably disposed towards it, do not rest in it, do not adopt it. That is me. I mean, I distinctly remember where I was the first time I really felt the weight of what it is to exist.
Yeah.
To like genuinely appreciate. And that is one of the most profound and wonderful things that I am, that I get to be, that I get to exist. Yeah. And so, yes, I'm not seeing eye to eye with the Buddha on this. I take delight in existence, and there are corrupt ways of doing that, right? But I think there are also really good and beautiful ways of doing it.
Absolutely, and to think it's not just Old Testament creation, Genesis 1 and 2, where God speaks the universe into being, right, and says, "Let there be light," and it was good. And when the whole thing is set and ordered, it is very good, right? And he doesn't say, well, it's an illusion. I'm just going to suck back into my being in 3 point whatever trillion years. It's like, this is very good. And then Jesus comes, and then in John, the apostle says, in the beginning was the word, the logos, right? And the word became flesh and dwelled among us. And so there's a sense in which it's not just impersonal force. There's a being that gave dignity to the physical world, and this world matters. And in fact, it matters so much, he became and incarnated into it as a part of it to redeem it. And so I love that about the Judeo-Christian message that this world is not something to escape. This world is something to redeem. It was wonderful and beautiful and will be again. But there is a path of suffering to, there is as David, Solomon's father said, the valley of the shadow of death, as I walk through it, I will fear no evil. Not because it's not real, not because I don't exist, not because I can detach, but I will not fear evil because you are with me. And there's a sense of that God has come into our existence and he suffers with us and therefore will redeem us, and we will share in his glory because he shared in our sufferings. And that to me is so much richer as a message.
Yeah, that was a major takeaway for me, and I think a good way to summarize it is what you said: the difference between escape and redemption.
Yes,
that ultimately the vision that we get from the Buddha is that the goal, the ideal future, is to transcend and move completely away from this into something totally different.
Yes.
Whereas, of course, in the Christian scriptures, it is that this is being redeemed, and there's a continuation, which makes perfect sense. I mean, as you're like the Buddhist philosophy is very coherent. So it makes sense that since there's no permanence, everything is impermanent. So nothing is actually continuing to exist from moment to moment. Everything's in constant flux and change. And there are no beings, there's no being, nothing that exists that is unchanging, uncaused, uncreated. And so you asked earlier about the atheistic part of it. And yes, I mean, it explicitly defines out of its philosophy what we mean by God, because there is no being that is necessarily existent, who's uncaused and so on. And so it's all sort of consistent in that way. If it makes sense, if you adopt that, these other things sort of flow from it. But that's just such a big difference, the difference between escaping this or it being redeemed, which also makes me think of the impact of beliefs on the way we behave, even when there's some ways, and that's really obvious. If I believe this is good to do, I might do it. Or if I believe it's bad, I might not. But in more abstract ways, the Eastern view, both Buddhism and Hinduism, is that everything is cyclical. So it's just cycle after cycle after cycle. There is no narrative. There's no direction that everything is moving towards. So it's just cycle after cycle, and you can get off the cycle at some point and then be sort of flat line or stabilize. But everything's cyclical. And this, and I'm certainly not the first person to point this out, is perhaps the explanation for why science doesn't develop in China, despite them becoming very technologically advanced. Because the notions of progress, which you get from certainly a Judeo-Christian view of the world, that we can progress towards something, we're moving towards something in the future, just isn't there. I mean, we've been through this cycle however many trillions of times. There's no reason to anticipate that things are going to be wildly different in 200 years from now.
Well, I can speak to that briefly. I took a summer course in Oxford, and the whole course was essentially along those lines. Why did technology advance so much faster in the West than in the East? And it boils down to this, yes, that things are cyclical in the East, but also in the sense that in the West, there was this idea that there was an intelligent creator being who designed his nature into the universe. And so there's a proverb, even by Solomon, that it is the glory of God to conceal a matter, and it's the glory of kings to search it out. And so Newton comes along, and he's like, I'm looking to search out the wisdom and the genius of God in the universe, who I believe is intelligent and has coded his brilliance into this world. And it's our job to discover it and to understand it. And they don't have that understanding in the East, that there's an intelligent creator God that put his brilliance and wisdom into the universe. And so for the Western science is based on a Judeo-Christian ethic, and that's one reason why it ran so far ahead of Eastern science, because there was an expectation that there would be something to find. Even Einstein himself, not as from a Christian standpoint, but from a Jewish standpoint, said God does not play dice with the universe. So Einstein himself was looking for the wisdom of God and the design of God in creation, whereas the Eastern world was not.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I think one other thing, this is hard to shift to a different topic within Buddhism, but one of the things that really stood out to me was the depiction of hell. And so, I think as we're thinking about, okay, why do these things matter? I mean, if Buddhism is true, if for no other reason, I want to know so that I can avoid its description of hell, which was extremely brutal. Like, if you think that there are passages from the New Testament that are scary, the Buddhist version was a lot worse. Being hacked by axes and tipped upside down and boiled for ever and ever.
And there was this multiple versions of horrific medieval torture. That if that didn't work, you go to the next one. And like, wow.
A lot of incentive to live good in a way to avoid that. But I thought that was interesting. Maybe one other thing for me on Buddhism, and then we can, if you have any other things we can hit.
Sure.
But I had this contrast that came out of something like the Great Commission, the Buddhist version of the Great Commission, which is not at all in virtue of being a Great Commission, his last words, let's say. So you think about the last words of Jesus before the ascension, go into all the world, make disciples, teaching all nations in my name, and so on. So here is the Buddhist version, his last words before he achieves nirvana and is gone. And now, O priest, I take my leave of you. All the constituents of being are transitory. Work out your salvation with diligence.
Yeah.
And in a way that captures how Buddhism falls short in my mind, that this is the final thing you need to know. All constituents of being are transitory. Now work out your salvation with diligence.
Right. So if it's transitory, well, you know what? Why do I have to work anything out? Like, if it's just kind of passing and we don't know where it's going, these are not edifying to think about. Why does it really matter in the end? And it's so, but if so there's that, but then there's that conflicting sense of there's this hell you're going to go to, but again, don't ask these questions. Just live according to the way, to the path. And again, the main goal is not salvation. The main goal is to avoid suffering.
Yeah.
And which is but this life doesn't really matter. It's all transitory, but then it really does matter because it's all that matters because we're trying to alleviate suffering within it. So there's a lot of contradictions, but that doesn't bother the Buddhist.
Yeah. I think one other thing that made me think of just the focus on, when we think about this life from a Buddhist context, the biggest thing that you see is suffering, is what I think can be accurately described as a pessimistic view of the world and of life, and of man in particular. And part of that I wanted to sort of affirm. So as we're moving through this and looking at different great thinkers and great works, one thing we'll definitely see is that people have roughly one of two, and maybe it's a spectrum, but one of two ways of thinking about man. Man is either basically good but becomes corrupted, or he's basically has problems but can be purified. Right. And so the Buddhist view is that man is ignorant. Like by nature, we are sort of ignorant, way too attached, and we need to be liberated. So there's something wrong with us, and we need some form of salvation. And I think that intuition is right. What did you think about that?
Absolutely. And kind of transitioning, if I could, to Solomon, one of the, I think that Solomon speaks to this difference. And if you take the concept of Hevel from Ecclesiastes, so Ecclesiastes is written about 900 BC, so about the time that the early Hindu writings are being written, and maybe 300-400 years ahead of the Buddha, 500 years ahead of the Buddha. And so you think there's this, at the end of the good and bad karma, this is said, nor grain, nor wealth, nor store of gold and silver, not one amongst his womenfolk and children, nor slave, domestic or hired man, nor anyone that eats his bread can follow him who leaves this life, but all things must be left behind, right? So it's like nothing really matters in this life. Like you said, transitory. But there's a but. But every deed a man performs with body or voice or mind, 'tis this that he can call his own. This with him he takes as he goes hence. This is what follows after him, and like a shadow never departs. Let all then noble deeds perform, a treasure store for future weal or blessing, for merit gained in this life within will yield a blessing in the next. So there's a sense in which nothing, no grain, no wealth, nothing, all things must be left behind except every deed. So your deeds will follow you, and they will essentially determine what happens to you somehow. And so we have this idea of Hevel, this idea of like everything is passing and transitory, but there is something that matters to you, and that is your deeds. And that reminded me of Ecclesiastes 12, which as Solomon, as the sage, is writing, he says, now at the very end of his book, the last two verses, now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commands, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring into every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Now remember, Solomon's writing this 500 years before the Buddha. But that is very much an endorsement of this life. Like, you will be judged. It does matter. But I think Ecclesiastes and Solomon go beyond Buddha's teaching to say it matters, not just because it matters for the next life or matters to kind of how you'll be judged, but it matters because God gave it dignity by creating you as a real person to reflect his image, and you can do that or not, and that really matters. And that's what I love about the Abrahamic religion, the Judeo-Christian ethic, and especially Ecclesiastes and Solomon's writings, how he roots us in God in a dualistic framework. God is creator, we are created, but we can reflect or not his image and bring glory to him and share in that glory or not. And those things really matter.
Yeah, I appreciate that as well, and how serious Ecclesiastes takes the problem of suffering as well. I mean, this comes out very viscerally in the text. There's, at one point I was teaching, and I read a passage from Ecclesiastes and asked people, where it came from, and it sounds like it comes from Jean-Paul Sartre or something. But yeah, it takes the question very seriously, and I think I'm curious what your thoughts are in terms of how it grapples with it, and what you kind of got to the solution there, I think. But
right, so Ecclesiastes really, to kind of kick off this segment, is a book that grapples with meaning. Why are we here? What matters? Also, and why are we here? And the meaning of life also then determines our morality. How should we then live? And Francis Schaeffer wrote the book, right? How should we then live? Which then leads into our destiny. Where will this all go? And so you kind of connect those three dots. Why am I here? How should I live? Where will this go? And the Hindu and the Buddhist have their answers, but Ecclesiastes really does connect those elements. And Ecclesiastes also, what I love about it, it takes a very honest, visceral look at human suffering and especially of the futility of achievement, of pleasure, of trying to essentially make everything out of this life. And that is futile. You will not achieve true pleasure. You will not achieve true glory. You will not achieve a true legacy. You will not achieve salvation. Essentially, you will not achieve anything. So what can you do that really matters? And Solomon does get to an answer, but he definitely takes you way down into the bottom of the hole to expose all of the false answers before he gives you anything more solid. If you've got 12 chapters, he really strikes a lot of licks in the first 8 chapters. And about chapter 9, he brings it brings it full circle. So I don't know how you read it, but how you take the meaning, the morality, the destiny sort of out of Ecclesiastes. Do you see that there?
Definitely. I think one thing that emerges as you read really serious works, like what we've been reading in this one in particular, is how these things are all connected. Yeah. So and Peter Kreeft points this out really well, but how your ethics are dependent on your metaphysics, which are connected to, like all of these ways that we think about life interrelate to one another.
Right.
And so you can't just sort of buffet line, pick and choose. You can do that,
right,
but you'll end up with a system that's not really coherent. And so these things work together and fit together in a serious system. Yeah, but I do. I mean, I think one of the things that comes from Ecclesiastes is you see how we have from ancient times, wise people have known that these things don't satisfy.
Right.
And we'll see that as we move through this. What fascinates me is how, I was talking to a friend about this recently, how we still try the same things. Like the number of people on planet Earth right now trying to achieve satisfaction through any one of those things that Solomon says, I tried to the maximum and it failed miserably.
Yeah.
We still continue to try to pursue things that way. And that's almost a puzzle to me.
Yeah. So, I mean, Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes almost 3,000 years ago. And he's saying, I tried pleasure, I tried riches, I tried, relationships, kind of wine, women, and song. And it's all failed. And here we are 3,000 years later, still doing it, like it's going to change.
Yeah.
But I mentioned this idea of hevel. And if you read Ecclesiastes in English, this Hebrew word hevel comes across in many different translations. You may see vanity or meaninglessness. But I wish they would have just stuck with the original literal translation, which is vapor. Yeah. Solomon is saying, he's not saying that life is vain or meaningless. He's saying it's a vapor. It passes quickly. And if that's true, if life is a vapor, and I think we would all agree that life is a vapor, like in the greater context, 70 or 80 years and is really, it's here today and gone tomorrow. So if that's true, what matters in the few days that we have? And that's the answer. That's the question Solomon is addressing. If man is like a breath, then why are we here? What does it mean? Where are we going? And how do we make this time matter without freaking out and becoming intensely, again, these two ditches, like instead of, I think the Eastern religions have brushed it off and, well, since you have endless cycles, don't worry about it. It's kind of like, it's like this, like I said, just sort of what will be will be. The other opposite would be to kind of oh my gosh, every single second I've got to, and I think Solomon is trying to say life matters and we do have meaning and we are going where what we do matters and where we will be judged and we will be going and meeting with God one day. But there is a balance to hold in tension where life is also normal and we have rhythms and we eat, we drink, we work, we play, and we do those. And what gives them meaning is not that we enjoy them in the moment. What gives them meaning is they are gifts to us from God and that we can enjoy them now in a shadow version of what we will ultimately enjoy in the reality together in his presence face to face. So I kind of took that sum from Solomon's Ecclesiastes. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, similar. And as that continues through this is Solomon, Jewish scriptures as it continues into the New Testament with Christian scriptures, this same thing emerges that I appreciate so much, which you just alluded to, which is that the good things in this life are shadows of some reality to come. They're signposts in a way, and so they have meaning because they're still going to be, the way that for people who maybe aren't aware, the Christian view of eternity in heaven is not some ephemeral or ethereal existence where you're just like kind of floating around in some sort of worshipful state. It's a new earth.
Yeah.
It's something kind of like this.
Physical,
Right, it's physical. We're embodied, and so we maintain our humanity, and we maintain even relationships, even though these will be reworked in a way, the relationships that we have will matter there as well. The ones that we formed here even can continue in a way there. And so, it seems to breathe a lot more value into our present life, I think, than the alternatives or maybe the Eastern view of things. So I appreciated that a lot.
Exactly. And so kind of putting Ecclesiastes up there as one of the greats, right? And Solomon is one of the great sages of the ancient world and really of all of history in any estimation. What do you see as Ecclesiastes contributing to the global conversation, to that symphony, if you will, of the greats? Why is Solomon here? What is great about this book?
Yeah, so this goes back to something we said a little bit earlier, but taking seriously human suffering and not just human suffering, but because that's really not, Ecclesiastes isn't necessarily focused on suffering, that he struggles with that, he wrestles with it, and seeing in particular, again, the ostensible injustice of the way that suffering takes place. But that's not necessarily the core. The core is more so what you mentioned earlier, how do we live a good life, where are we going, these kinds of things. And in particular, though, he takes this approach of putting up ways in which man has tried and failed, and sort of analyzing those or showing that they fail. Right. And this is something of a pattern that gets picked up. So as we'll see as we get to works like Boethius with the Consolations of Philosophy, you see this there. Augustine does it. Aquinas does it. And so it sort of sets this pattern of something that's going to be picked up over and over again of here are the places that people tend to, the baskets they put all their eggs in, or the thing that they exalt as the greatest good.
Right.
And here's how it leaves them completely empty because it's not actually the greatest good. And so the way that Solomon takes of pointing us to our greatest good is to first sort of survey all the things that we might otherwise think. Yeah. And by eliminating all those, there's one that's left.
That's right.
Which is God.
And I do appreciate that. So kind of putting Ecclesiastes in context with the Hindu and the Buddhist sacred writings, I see, like you said, Ecclesiastes taking seriously human suffering, taking seriously, speaking very highly of God, of a very high view of God, and taking seriously the injustices in the world. And, the paradoxes that he mentions in chapter 3, that there's a time for all things to be born and to die, to plant and to uproot, to kill and to heal, to tear down and build up, and all these sort of seeming paradoxes, but they're all just a part of life. This these cycles, not of endless lives, but of things that happen within our lives, and that these are cycles that are real. I think against the if you will, kind of in contradistinction to the Eastern philosophies, it does not offer a ritual formula like if you just stick to your Dharma, if you just fulfill your role as a warrior priest, you can just kill all these people and you'll move on, you'll keep society in order. I think, or if you can just follow the Eightfold path or these noble truths, if you just follow these sort of ritual formulas. Yes, I think this would be the path. Instead of that, I think he, like you said, he eliminates all of the false ways that we pursue meaning. And you're left with this one to realize that I think he instead of saying, I'm going to pull back the veil and this is it, he says there is a veil. God is the ultimate meaning, but he has given us these things around us, which give them meaning too. And because these things are gifts from God, a family, food, work, achievement, these things, they're not, we don't create the meaning for them. God has given them meaning because he has given them to us. And when the world was created, here they are, and it was very good. And we get to participate in that. And one day, there'll be a redeemed version, a perfect version. But until that day, we work our way through the shadow version. And so I think that Solomon finds meaning in the daily life, not that he gives to it, but that God gave to it. So that's, I think, a core difference from Solomon and the Eastern religions.
Yeah. In terms of contribution, I should say this. I'm so used to it that it doesn't even come to mind. But a theistic framework for viewing all of reality.
Yes.
I mean, this is the key difference, the difference that it makes for there to be a single creator God who is the omnis, who is classical theism, all knowing, all good, all powerful,
all loving,
right? This is, that one question impacts everything else. I think it was, I'm blanking on his name, but who said this is the most important question. He wrote How to Read a Book. Mortimer Adler.
Yeah, Mortimer Adler, yes.
So Mortimer Adler, who is extremely well read, puts together the works on the greatest works of the Western canon, which is kind of what we're we're certainly covering some of the same things. He says, having reviewed all that the most important question is, does God exist?
Yeah. And who is he? And I think that is the gift of the Jews, if you will, to the world, is monotheism, right? That there is a creator God who is personal, and that this created universe reflects this God's true nature, that he has personhood, he has thoughts, and that there are divine beings that are good and evil and that impact the world around us. And therefore, our goal in life is to know this God and to reflect his nature and to grow in his nature. And that this is the way that we experience meaning in life, is to more and more know this God that gave it to us. And so that's I think the ultimate answer of Solomon, to say, look, you're not going to find it out there. You're going to find it as you're in your created being, experience the world around you. You engage family, you engage work, you engage your gifts, you engage nature. And all of these things point you to something greater, a personal God that made us in his image, to know him and ultimately know him face to face, which is going to happen one day. And so I love that and that is a great gift that Solomon and the Hebrews gave to the world, and that brings together really East and West, that God is great and holy and wonderful and awesome and transcendent, and at the same time immanent, at the same time here, at the same time made this and gave it meaning. So I love that. It feels like a tension, and it is, but it's a beautiful mystery that we get to live every day.
Yeah. I think one last thing I'd say about all three works that we reviewed, all three religious traditions, would be that from what we read, even though Hinduism is fairly viewed as being fairly tolerant, and there's certainly, if you talk to a Hindu like our friend Sam, who would say, if he meets a Christian, his advice isn't, well, you should start thinking about becoming a Hindu. It's, you should be a better Christian.
Right.
But if you read the Bhagavad Gita, for example, I mean, Krishna does say pretty explicitly, like, I am the Supreme Lord, and the best thing to do is to worship me. Some people get it wrong and they worship lower gods or other things, but you really should be worshiping me. Right. And Buddhism has something similar. I mean, the Buddha says, like, this is the way, and those who depart from it are missing something. Yeah. And Solomon, Christians, Jews say the same thing. And so it really is a misimpression to think that any one of these really are just like just kind of whatever works for you. Right. There is a true way. Each of these is claiming that they have it to a degree and in some different ways. But that raises the stakes for why it matters, right? Because each of them have some really, really great things that you could potentially have, some really bad things that could potentially happen, and it matters a lot which one of these is true. And so that just reignites the fire in me to pursue the truth of the matter. Absolutely, and all of these have exclusive truth claims, and so you're right. While the Hindu may tell me, pursue your religion, at the end of the day, he really believes I'll achieve moksha and liberation faster if I pursue it as a Hindu. And so there's no doubt that while there are superficial and some more significant similarities especially in the moralities, if you will, or the ethics, and even the aesthetics of the axiologies of these religions, fundamentally their creator gods are very different, and therefore the ultimate destiny of the human soul is also very different, and salvation is ultimately on the line, and how that works. And so it is very important to understand these differences and to live according to the truth as it is in the universe, not as you perceive it, but as it really is. And there is a way in which some things are, and you mentioned earlier the philosophies that kind of that are interrelated in each of these. Ontology, right, being like, and or metaphysics, like what exists, and then epistemology, how do you know, right? And then some would add a third, like axiology, sort of like the key themes within it, whether it's ethics or aesthetics. How do you live? So like being, ontology,
epistemology, how do you know, and then axiology, or how do you live then? And these are all very much connected, no matter what tradition you're in, and they lead to very different next lives. So the stakes are pretty high, and that makes it really important for us to get to the heart of these matters. Yeah. One thing I love about Solomon, and I feel like he brings it to a close in chapter 9, and I don't know if, but he says, "So I reflected on all this and concluded that the righteous and the wise and what they do are in God's hands, but no man knows whether love or hate awaits him." That is a really big difference from the Eastern religions, which say essentially that if you do well, good should await you, and if it doesn't in this life, it will. You'll reincarnate higher or achieve moksha. But that is a very anti-karma statement. Mm-hmm. That God is in charge, and He will allow things to go on as He will allow for His own reasons. But what you do still matters, and that is an important distinction, and I think one that Solomon makes really alone. And so his conclusion at chapter 9: "Go and eat your food with gladness and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for it is now that God favors what you do. Be clothed in white and anoint your head with oil. Enjoy life with your wife whom you love all the days of this meaningless," or hevel rather, right? Vapor life that God has given you under the sun, all of your vapor days. "For this is your lot and your toilsome labor under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For in the grave where you're going, there is neither working nor planting nor knowledge nor wisdom." In other words, what you have to do it now. Do it now. Yeah. Love your wife. Love your kids. Do your work. Use your gifts. Engage the world, because now is the day. And one day, as he says in the very last words of the book, "Fear God and keep His commands. This is the whole duty of man. For God will bring into every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether good or evil." So what you do ultimately matters. You got one shot. Make it count.
Yeah, great. So we talked about truth and how much it matters and the difference in these perspectives. So maybe now quickly we can share some resources. So if somebody's watching, listening, and thinking, man, I'd like to read more about this, maybe they want to be able to disagree with us better.
Yes.
Then we can recommend some resources that they can dig into on their own.
Yeah, so obviously starting with Hinduism, recommend the Bhagavad Gita. I think any Hindu would recommend starting there. It's simple, it's accessible. It's a great way to get into the firsthand language of their faith. After the Bhagavad Gita, then it kind of becomes, do you go back to the Mahabharata?
Yeah, which would be a pretty big undertaking.
Yeah. So, but I think just reading up on the different strains of Hinduism, just for context.
Yeah. I would say, primary sources, but within Hinduism, Bhagavad Gita. After that, or as a parallel to that, the very short introduction series. So the very short introduction to Hinduism, very short introduction to Buddhism, very short introduction, so on. Those are great ones. One, because they're very short and accessible and give you a lot of breadth in a short volume. But also at the back are pretty detailed bibliographies. So if you want to dive into more study, that's like a treasure trove of resources that you can go to from there.
Absolutely. And of course, core Buddhist writings are not, you can find those anywhere from the Harvard series or otherwise, core Buddhist writing, and please do get them in firsthand. Yeah, I like the very short introductions for the bibliographies as well. Some of the master classes, the great courses, have some introductions to these matters. And then, of course, Ecclesiastes, very accessible, Solomon, in any Bible. And so start there, preferably a Bible that's got some notes, because Solomon can come off a little bit despairing. But keep in mind, he's trying to take you there to despair you of the false paths to life, so that he can replace it with the ultimate meaning in which God has given us, not from within us, but from without us. And so it was above our pay grade to receive it, so it's above our pay grade to reject it. And so I love that about Solomon's Ecclesiastes. So you can start there. You can go with the Bible Project online, or some other resources that would show you some insights into Ecclesiastes and Solomon as a sage.
Great.
All right. Good times.
Awesome. Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Appreciate it.
Yep.